be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors.
Okay, those are new Canadians, immigrants to this country, taking the oath of allegiance, in particular to the Queen, and that's the controversial part of it. 3 permanent residents of Canada say it's unconstitutional. So Joel Sandeluk joins us, immigration lawyer at Mammon Sandeluk Migration Law. Joel, great to have you here. What is your take on that? What's your knee-jerk reaction to that?
My knee-jerk reaction, just as a Canadian, is that there probably doesn't really need to be an oath to the Queen anymore. I think a lot of people have a lot of legitimate reasons not for wanting to take an oath to an individual who's a living person. The three appellants in this case, one was his family had been persecuted as Irish Republicans. One is a Rastafarian, had a religious objection to it, and the other is a person who just feels it offends his sense of equality to have a sovereign monarch. And you know, it seems somewhat anachronistic to require an oath to a particular person. The thing that seems strange to me is that there isn't a middle ground that the government isn't pursuing here. And I think that most individuals
what would the middle ground be? Allegiance to the country, for instance? I've never
precisely.
actually, as a Canadian, I've actually never taken that oath.
I actually have.
You have?
As a barrister, we're required to take a barrister's oath when we're called to the bar. Oh. And the truth of the matter is most people just kind of mumble through it. And I think a lot of the offense that people are taking to this case has more to do with the idea of that this is Canada, this is who we are. You're coming from a different country, you're a foreign national. When you apply for citizenship, you have to take certain parts of our country. And one of those things is the fact that Canada is a constitutional monarchy. But the reality is that the Queen is not really as present in our lives as perhaps she was in 1867. And this is part of the way that society changes, is through court cases, through litigation, and through a general recognition that Canada perhaps Canadians don't need to swear an oath to an individual living human being, but rather an oath to Canada the nation, Canada's Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Well, Americans swear allegiance to the flag, but the flag is representative of the country per se. It's not like, I like this flag over another flag kind of thing.
That's correct. I mean, you could argue that the Queen is little more than a flag, or little more than a symbol. But the reality is that people have real and, in a lot of cases, legitimate objections to swearing an oath of allegiance to a person and her successors.
Because that person happens to be the head of the Queen of England, or the Church of England as well.
Well, there's that. There's also the fact that she's a foreign national. She herself is a foreign monarch. And, you know, I mean, from my perspective, does it offend me as a Canadian to have permanent residents not want to swear an oath to the Queen? To be perfectly honest, not really. I think if you asked most Canadians, what they'd say is it's more important that they be loyal to Canada, that they have their allegiance to Canada, rather than their allegiance to an individual or even a particular institution that's part of Canada's historical framework, but not really so relevant in our day-to-day existence.
Okay, now if this goes through the Ontario Court of Appeals, I think it is, Ontario's Appeal Court, the feds are going to challenge it.
Correct.
Because, why?
Well, because at the lower level of court, what they said is that it was a breach of individuals' human rights under the Charter, but it was a justifiable breach. So what happened is there were 2 appeals. There was an appeal both from the appellants, who felt that they shouldn't have to swear the oath, and an appeal from the Crown, which was offended at the proposition that there was any breach of anybody's liberty rights by requiring an oath to the Queen. So both sides are appealing, and both parties will be heard out on this issue.
Liberty rights meaning really freedom of speech?
Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. Because there's multiple objections to the oath on either religious grounds, on political grounds. There's a number of liberty interests engaged here.
Do you see this thing going to this is at the Ontario Appeals Court? Do you see it going to the Supreme Court?
Potentially, yeah, because we have 2 parties that both seem to be very committed to their perspectives. The Canadian government is cross-appealing. Didn't have to. The Canadian government won. But was upset with the principle from the Superior Court. And now we have another side, which is, basically it's a test case. You've got 3 people who have been selected with a particular perspective and a particular, and valid interest, bringing this case in an effort to affect social change. So you've got 2 committed sides. I think it's probably fair to say that whatever the Court of Appeal does decide, not everybody will be content with it. And given the nature of the interests, I think it's entirely possible the Supreme Court will hear it.
Yeah. Have they heard anything in the past, Joel, to your knowledge, anything about monarchist issues in this country? I mean, we've seen it in other jurisdictions, and I'm thinking Australia, for instance,
Yeah.
but not in this country that I can think of.
You know, Canada, generally speaking, kind of accepts its monarchy. She's on all our money. It doesn't really trouble a lot of Canadians. Partly, I mean, and perhaps because I'm from Alberta, I'm from out west. Canada's monarchist symbols just don't even feature as prominently in other parts of Canada as they do in central Canada here.
Why is that? Kind of an independent spirit? And
Perhaps.
shouldn't all Canadians be more like that, do you think?
Perhaps. It could have been. It could have involved the time that those provinces came into Confederation. They came, 50 years after or so than central Canada. But the truth of the matter is that I haven't really got a clue. Most Canadians just accept the monarchy, and of course the alternative, of course, is reopening the Constitution, which nobody wants to do. And so there's a kind of a general acceptance that this is part of our history, it's part of our heritage. It's maybe not perfect. You can compare it to the Catholic school system. But it's something that we're, for want of a better expression, stuck with. And in a lot of cases, the cure is worse than the disease. And that, I think, is probably how a lot of Canadians view the monarchy.
Yeah, so you're saying that if it does go to the Supreme Court and overrules it, then we open up the constitutional debate?
Not necessarily. I mean, the government doesn't have to require an oath to the Queen. That's not in the Constitution. I mean, that Canada has a Queen is in the Constitution. But that Canadians or new Canadians are required to swear an oath to the Queen is not. That's why I say that there's a middle ground that for some reason doesn't really seem to have been explored. It'd be a lot cheaper and a lot easier. And presumably I think it would satisfy most Canadians because nobody is suggesting that these individuals are not loyal to Canada. And none of these individuals are saying that they have any lack of loyalty or lack of interest in supporting Canada. It's not about the country, it's about the distinction between the institution of the monarchy and the individual monarch versus loyalty to your own nation.
Yeah. Joel, great discussion. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Joel Sandelek joining us.